you'll see the pews here, and many people who come wonder why the pews are facing each other. They are turned 90 degrees from what you normally would find in a church. And that is because that when the seminarians recite the divine office, especially morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer, they do so in a monastic style, which is called antiphonal. Ante means against, and phonos means sound, so they sound off against each other. They will alternate the different verses of the Psalms so that each can hear what the other is saying. And so they face toward each other. We have back here pews that were added later in the history of the seminary. Many times they were reserved for members of the laity who would come to St. Charles on a Sunday afternoon and listen to Vespers being chanted by the seminarians. Among those lay people who came here was Thomas Akins, who would come out from his home in West Philadelphia on Sunday afternoon, listen to Vespers, and then he would paint portraits of the various members of the faculty. And that collection was later gathered together in the Akins room, but most of it has now been given away to various art museums.
While we're still in the pews, we have to ask the question, how old are these pews to the chapel?
They are, the ones up there are definitely original. These came a little later, probably around 1915 or so. But
every student who's wandered through here has wondered where these have come from.
I have pictures from the history book of 1890, and the pictures show them to be here already then.
They're tiny.
They are.
And students have felt that it forced them to stay awake during professorial homilies. Was that the whole purpose, or was there another idea behind it?
Just, I think, maybe people's sizes were smaller back in the 1870s than they are now. Even if you go to old baseball parks, you'll notice that the seats in places like Connie Mack Stadium and the Polo Grounds in Ebbets Field, the seats were rather more narrow than they are now. So apparently we've managed to expand ourselves in the history of the past 200 years.
What's the spot on the wall over here? Can we talk about that?
The spot on the wall, oh, you mean the square?
The square.
Oh. Well, when this place was built in the 19th century, the decorations were a little more gaudy, and so that's what the place would have looked like with that fancy wallpaper type thing. They redid the seminary after my ordination. They repainted it, but they thought it would be a good idea if people could see what used to be here. So spotted around the places are all these little squares or rectangles that show what the wall would have looked like if it hadn't been repainted. There is a rather rickety spiral staircase, and all kinds of rumors have begun about this. My favorite one is that it was built because of the Know Nothing riots in Philadelphia, and if the seminary was ever attacked, the students could go down the steps and hide. Well, considering the Know Nothing riots were in the 1840s, and this chapel wasn't rededicated until the 1880s, I would think that it's a false rumor. So probably the reason they put a staircase here was for a very simple reason. Applying Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is the best. So they could get downstairs and they can store things down there. So it probably was used as kind of a form of a sacristy, or places where that you would keep things that were necessary. So the legend is definitely not true, and the reason for a staircase is so people can go up and down the stairs from one floor to another.
How about these doors here? Were these doors original to the building?
Not the actual door, but the door spaces. This is how you came in and out. These were the two side doors. The ones back there were put in later.
So again,
but the glass doors, no, they were all wooden doors back then.
We had a Eutychus moment here where one of the seminarians during a professorial homily nodded off, hit the crash bar, went out the door. All we saw were feet.
Was that during one of your homilies?
That was during one of mine.
I thought so. Okay.
And the light fixtures, were they oil lamps originally?
They were. They don't think the gas came in here until somewhere between 1890 and 1910. Well, remember, St. Charles opened in 1871. The electric light bulb wasn't invented until 1879. So they couldn't have put electric light bulbs. They didn't exist. And it's thought that Ryan began to put the first electricity in here in 1892. And it's thought when they renovated the chapel for the second time around 1915 that that's when they put lights in here. The organ that is presently here goes back to the year 1950. So comparatively speaking, that's modern here at Mother Overbrook. The original organ was a pump organ, which meant that someone had to stand at the side and imagine like a blacksmith's bellows or something, had to keep pushing up and down on a handle to get air to go into the pipes so that the organ could be played. Well, whoever was the director of the choir back then was not going to waste a good tenor or bass when someone just pushing air into the pipes. So he always selected someone who could not sing. And so therefore he wasn't losing any good voices when he did that. Well, the position became one of great honor because you could be in the choir and not be able to sing a single note. So you were considered to be someone who had overcome great obstacles to get into the choir. You were almost like the coxswain in one of those races that we have here in the Schuylkill River. He doesn't do one single stroke. All he does is simply yell and count and beat and all that. And so,
do you know anything about the Stations of the Cross?
They came very late. They are from like the 1980s or 1990s. They are donated by the Priest Alumni Association. I don't know what has happened to the original, but you can see they don't fit the motif. They are fairly modern in comparison to a 19th century chapel. And so they are probably the youngest of the elements of the chapel.